Welcome. My name is Alexander, and this is Star Trek Deep Space Nine Harbinger. I don't remember playing many games licensed from other media as a kid, but looking back, almost all the ones I did play were Star Trek based, and DS9 was the show to watch when I was in my early adolescence. I'm playing it via DOSBox installer, I'll link in the description, and if you have the same problem as me where it's playing in a small window, pressing Shift and Enter should fix that. This was originally on 2 CDs, and when you get the Change CD prompt, you need to press Control F4 before following the directions to switch to the imaginary discs. In the Grand Trek tradition, the game begins with a log entry. You play Bannock, a junior diplomat on his way to Deep Space Nine to assist a noted ambassador with a secret mission. On the way, though, you come under attack by small alien drones and are sent tumbling out of control toward the titular space station. With a little help from the crew, Bannock's ship merely lands very roughly at DS9, and so comes the big selling point of Harbinger for any young Trekkie. You're on Deep Space Nine, for crying out loud. Well, some of it. There's only so much you can do with a 2 CD game from 1996. In-game, the station is almost deserted except for a skeleton crew and a few stragglers due to a plasma storm buffeting the station, and most of the station is closed down. But you still get to visit the most common set pieces from the show, perfectly recognizable, and of course interact with the crew. And yeah, like I said, there's only so much you can do with the technology of the time. I'm not sure of the technical term here, but low polygon, pixelated, and 256 colors are all descriptions that I find myself coming back to. And then there's the show's main characters. Security Chief Odo, to start with, Captain Sisko himself, judging from his still having hair and a beard and the rank of captain, we're at or just after Season 3 here. Major Kira, Science Officer Dax, and eventually Quark, the let's go with entrepreneurial barkeep. All of them are voiced by their live actors, and there are a couple of one-off characters around the place as well. Just a shame they all look like animatronic dolls. It could be worse, at least they don't look like low-polygon origami, like in, say, Half-Life a couple of years later. But the way they move, when they do move, the way they can either talk or move, it's like watching marionettes handled by a rookie puppeteer. There's a point partway into the game where Captain Sisko issues you a phaser, but his hand stays curved around where the phaser was, and it's still like that every time you go to talk to him after that. Not that issues like that have gone away, it actually reminds me a lot of games like Mass Effect, but there it's sort of compensated for by the way characters shift and fidget a little during and between lines. In this game, they just go stock still, completely unresponsive, and when you're facing them, they just stare at you, into your soul. Ugh. I'll say this, the actors are doing a stand-up job, and the dialogue is generally quite good. Although it too suffers from jank, like the classic editing problem of characters pausing so someone can interrupt them.
Carlton, Kira.
Kira here. Go ahead.
Sorry about the delay, Major, but melted duranium is harder than
a Cardassian's heart, I know.
I can't imagine an actor like Avery Brooks phoning in a performance, but there is something really off about Sisko's dialogue. It sounds like he did lots of different takes and the editors cut mismatched ones together.
You must help Ambassador Carrick open up lines of communication with the Scythians. We've got to determine their relationship to the drones. If we can block the drones' sensors, well done.
Still, getting to introduce yourself to the crew and join the team for a day is genuinely still pretty fun, and soon enough you have to get to work. The premise is a classic Star Trek plot. A delegation of newly contacted aliens has arrived at the station, and Bannock's job is to support a Federation ambassador in building formal diplomatic relations, and it'll be extra challenging because their idiosyncratic speech makes it hard to understand them. When the drones suddenly start attacking the station, our heroes realize the aliens don't control the drones as it first seemed, and you might have a common enemy.
Defend! Destroy! You want us to destroy?
So when I say this is a classic Star Trek plot, I mean it's literally a reworking of the plot of the Next Generation episode Darmok. But there's more than that. After helping fend off the drones, Bannock goes to the ambassador's quarters, only to find he's been foully murdered. So you have to embark on an investigation to figure out both why he was killed and by whom, and reconstruct his work on how to talk to the aliens. Which brings me to a complicated question. What kind of game is this? Very broadly, it's a puzzle-adventure game. The very first bit of gameplay is a fairly simple matching puzzle to repair a damaged safety system.
Monitoring systems.
back online.
But the main puzzle is really talking to people. Talk to possible witnesses like Johnny here, listen to the ambassador's records and discuss them with the crew, and talk to the aliens once you know how. The dialogue system is somewhere between the topic list of Siberia and the dialogue tree system of a game like Mass Effect, but the fact that you're investigating a mystery makes the RPG-style "tell me more" prompts seem less goofy. And there's an emphasis on actually listening to the dialogue and interpreting some of it yourself that enhances the whodunit mystery vibes. Sometimes you have divergent choices, so you're not going to hear every possibility in every playthrough, but every choice gives a different shading to the conversation or a different piece of the puzzle. For example, on my recording playthrough, I went straight to the ambassador after the drone attack and didn't go to Quark's for a while. When I did go there, Quark was nowhere to be found, and you can get some possible leads from Johnny. But if you go to Quark's first, he's still there, and you get a major hint into the murder mystery. Much like Myst, you're clicking your way from point to point, finding and opening doors. The station environment can get a bit maze-like, especially in odd-shaped places like Ops, where it's hard to tell where you need to turn and how far, and finding the right thing to click on is sometimes a pixel hunting exercise. You actually genuinely need to be familiar with the show's set design. I remember being stuck for what feels like weeks or more as a kid trying to find the docking ring in the alien delegation because I didn't know this was a door. Didn't look like the other doors, and the open door cursor only appeared around the middle of it. Mercifully, my brother ended up playing it while he was off sick one day and finally figured it out. Speaking of doors, I'd forgotten that when you walk toward DS9's gear-like airlocks, the door keeps flipping back and forth with every screen. It happens so consistently that I have to imagine the developers did it on purpose for some reason. And then there's the combat. Yep, there's combat too, sort of. Starting with helping fight the drone attack, there are a couple of points in the story where you have to get into the tactical seat. I think these count as rail shooter elements. I'm moving the targeting reticule around and firing, but I'm not moving the camera. It just does that and I shoot what comes by. Or try to. I have gotten so much worse at this since I was a kid. It also speaks to the limits of the graphics that phaser beams look like they're being drawn in Microsoft Paint. If you meet Quark early on, he'll give you access to one of his holosuites, and it runs a couple of combat simulations that you can practice any time between story events. Once you figure out where the drones are coming from, there's also a simulation to prep for it in there, and you need to pick off as many attackers as you can, otherwise...
Well, we found out one thing for sure. These drones are tough.
There's also a couple of what are more or less quick-time events, where you need to phaser an enemy before you get shot. Generally, they're not too hard, but if you do get killed, you have to go back to your last save. Certainly gives death more weight than in Riddle of the Sphinx, but it seems like a high penalty for a reflex test in a game that isn't centered on combat. As skill tests go, it's at least honest. Playing it now, it's hilarious how Star Trek technobabble ends up massively overselling this puzzle. Dax sets you up trying to decode the dead ambassador's files like this.
But to try all possible permutations, almost a quarter Google of them, well, we just don't have that kind of time.
And then it's basically a color matching puzzle. Then again, Bannock does say he knew the ambassador well enough to narrow things down. Bannock's in an odd position as a player character. He's named after a type of bread, for one thing. We never see his face, like the point of view character in a Myst game, but he has a voice, so you aren't meant to fully project onto him.
Look, I'm Bannock. I'm with the Tyrian delegation. Maybe I can help you. What's your name?
He's not human, he's a Tyrian, a species introduced in the game, and there's a few remarks in the dialogue about Tyrian traits.
Something's wrong. Not even a Tyrian could sleep through that.
But nothing really important. He's also weirdly overqualified. He's just an envoy, not an ambassador, a distinction that, as far as I know, doesn't mean anything in real diplomatic services. But he's also got high weapons proficiency.
But Envoy Bannock is a diplomat.
With a weapons proficiency rating of 8.
And anti-assassin training?
Anti-assassin training? Level 4.
I know, right? It just seems contrived, especially when my shooting in the game is so lousy. The station's short-handed. It'd seem more natural for you to help out in a crisis and then have someone say, "Hey, thanks for the help. You're pretty good for someone who isn't trained," or something. So when you solve the mystery of who killed the ambassador, you go back to talk to the aliens. They're called the Scythians for some reason. Nothing about their culture or backstory really puts one in mind of Bronze Age steppe nomads, but whatever. You talk to them enough to understand their history with the drones and join them on a mission to infiltrate the ancient automated Citadel that's still churning them out, and which is preparing a new flagship to attack Deep Space Nine. But once again, you crash. Not my fault. I was the gunner, Kira was the pilot, and if she couldn't avoid the crash, nobody could. So as Bannock, you have to go out and explore the ancient alien monument, trying to establish contact with Odo on the Scythian ship, discover the history and purpose of the Citadel, and figure out how to interface with its control systems and shut it down. And this, I have to assume, is where whatever drugs the developers were on kicked in. Unbound from the pre-existing aesthetics of the show's set design, the developers of Harbinger created a vaguely Arabian Nights aesthetic that evokes Myst and the Journeyman Project by way of Forbidden Planet. When you activate an elevator and then turn around, you're treated to this psychedelic screensaver while the level loads. You have to learn the symbolism of these stained glass controls, which is a little abstract and I definitely struggled with it as a kid, but it's mostly pretty intuitive. If you watch Ross's Game Dungeon, his video about the game Rama showcases some very similar imagery. I also wonder if this wagon wheel motif is inspired by the actual Scythians from history and their chariots, about the only connection I can see. Unfortunately, that motif is in the part of the Citadel that almost killed this game dead for me back in the day. I call it the Room of Beams, and it's a 3-dimensional maze. You have to get to 3 different points in the maze to activate power to access other parts of the Citadel. The fact that you can see the whole maze helps a little, but the overlapping levels makes it really hard on the eyes. Oh, and every so often, the game will randomly spawn 1 or 2 drones, and if you don't shoot them down in time... This is unique in my experience, an adventure game maze that you need save scumming to get through, and it's almost unbearable. I had like 24 saves of the maze after a while just so I wouldn't forget what route I'd used if I got killed. I have to say I do appreciate that the beam room has these broken bits of wall and floor around the edges. Makes me think it's not supposed to look like this, as opposed to crazy set pieces in things like Star Wars or Half-Life. Speaking of Half-Life, the contrast between the part of the game on DS9 and here in the Citadel is a lot like the contrast between Black Mesa and Zen, in that the change in gameplay and scenery is pretty jarring, but Zen's only the tail end of Half-Life. This is half the game. Here's my advice. Go to the control room at the top of the maze first, because that has the controls to turn on power and also turn the drones off. And then save before you leave, just in case you got it wrong. After a while, they do start coming back again. I thought this was a bug at first, but I think it's supposed to be a sign the Citadel security system is on to you. Despite that, this was always my favorite kind of Star Trek episode where they had to be space archaeologists, so getting to live it out in this game is very satisfying, even as it's a little opaque and laborious. Generally speaking, the game has lots of Star Trek tropes. The plot feels like a synthesis of the developers' favorite Trek episodes. The plasma storm forcing the station to be evacuated is lifted directly from the second season episode Invasive Procedures, Darmok, like I said, and I think I see elements of Arsenal of Freedom in there. But that's my point. The plot lines are all very tried and true ones you could find in most Trek scripts. There's also little nods to characters who aren't in the game.
Brian's going to be furious if we don't find that thing before he gets back.
Deep Space Nine's only remaining Cardassian, Mr. Garrick. He says he's a simple tailor, but I don't think so.
The dark origin story of the station is described. Quark's Klingon misadventures in the House of Quark are alluded to. At last, you're able to interact with the AI programs that run the Citadel, figure out the history and programming that drives them, and win the day. Then you rush back to the station to take on their last attack wave from the bridge of the Defiant. This is oddly familiar. And that's the game. I don't know if my memory of it was surprisingly good or the game isn't very hard. I was playing in easy mode, mind you. But my recording playthrough only took me a day, and the beam maze aside, it was a fun and nostalgic day. It's also interesting how DS9 Harbinger has superficial elements of branching story paths that seemed really exciting as a kid, whereas in the post-Mass Effect 3 world it seems tired and overhyped. Speaking of Harbingers. The Star Trek franchise has a reputation for being stubbornly unworkable as good material for video games. To be sure, this one definitely shows signs of dodgy production and some mismatched gameplay. Being a licensed property is sometimes a bad sign that the production quality won't be the best. Dawn of War and Emperor Battle for Dune are both games I find quite good, though, and they're licensed. But I think that actually highlights the problem. Dawn of War and Battle for Dune are both real-time strategy games about combat. Even with its Dominion War arc, Deep Space Nine is still Star Trek, and that's not what Star Trek should be about. For all its dated technology and jank, Deep Space Nine Harbinger's puzzle-adventure game with RPG elements is close to what a Star Trek game should be. A little action for flavor, but focused on investigation, diplomacy, and characters. And I'm pleasantly surprised to say that Harbinger achieves that in a modest way. It's mostly free of adventure game fever dream logic, and getting to see these characters again is just nice, frankly. So live long and prosper, and thank you for watching.